Hi, and welcome back to the channel and our series on PhD life. I'm joined today by two current PhD students, Gaia Giampietro and Elise. Both of them are studying their PhD currently. I forget what years are you in? Can you maybe just give a bit of context to our viewers as to what current stage of your PhD you're in, and also maybe a little bit about what your PhD is about. So maybe Elise, if you start first, how far into your PhD are you and what is it about?
Currently at the end of my first year, about to go into my second year, and the broad theme of my PhD is looking at paranoia in the general population, but more specifically looking at how we can establish behavioural indices of paranoia through virtual reality.
Cool. So you got some VR stuff. That sounds exciting to be part of. Can I be a participant in one of your experiments?
Yes, please.
And how about yourself, Gaia?
I'm also in my first year. I started in September, and I'm looking at how to improve a witness performance in forensic lineups by modifying the distinctiveness of the foils in the lineups.
Cool. Okay. So I can see a lot of kind of core key implications of that work, clear relevance to the legal system and so forth. So that sounds really interesting, and fingers crossed you both find some really valuable information in your PhDs. Obviously, what we're going to talk about today is supervising in a PhD. So what is your supervisor? What is their responsibilities and that sort of stuff? Obviously, you're at the beginning of your PhD, so maybe this is still good and fresh in your mind for both of you. But I guess the first question I had in mind was, how did you select your supervisor? That's something for me, whenever I do sort of personal tutor meetings with undergraduate students who are maybe considering doing a PhD, they always ask me this question. How do I get onto a PhD? How does it work? So maybe you can talk about the process that you took, selecting your supervisor and kind of getting onto the PhD. Maybe Gaia, do you want to start first?
Yeah, in my case, I actually chose Nick as my master's supervisor. So I did a master in forensic psychology, and I chose him as my supervisor because his research interest was very aligned with mine. And when he gave like a little pitch, and then I went to do research, and I thought it was really interesting, and I just went there and asked him to be my supervisor, and they were great. And then I was doing some array work with him, and it just happened that he had a PhD place available, and he liked me, so I was there. But so I didn't really go through the whole emailing the supervisor and checking if he's all right with my personality, etc. But I did have to look at his research, and I think that's really, really important, because if he doesn't know what to do with the research, then he's not going to be able to help you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make, that regardless of how you really fall into your kind of PhD, for you, it seemed a bit like you were doing your MSc, and it just was a kind of happy coincidence that suddenly your master supervisor had a PhD opportunity available. But it's a good point anyway, is that you really want to think about the experience and expertise that they have to really supervising the project that you're interested in doing. Elise, I'm just wondering if you have a similar experience or a diverging experience about how you got into your PhD.
Yeah, so mine was actually very similar to Gaia. So I did my master's at Royal Holloway, and I worked with my PhD supervisor for my master's dissertation. She also had a PhD placement going, and a few weeks into being her master's dissertation student, she spoke about wondering what my career options are, and if I considered a career in research, which had been something I've been looking at. Began to talk to me about the PhD idea, which builds upon my master's research, and I quickly came to the decision that I really wanted to do a PhD. There was a placement going, and I already had an established bond with my primary supervisor, and here we are.
I mean, it's really interesting that both of you kind of got into your PhD in a similar fashion. And I would say, actually, from my recollection of people that I know who do PhDs, actually, the way in which you both got into your PhD doesn't necessarily seem like the orthodox way it occurs. Because I think something we should probably be kind of clear with is that it's not necessarily you have to go and do a master's, and it's not necessarily that you then go and whoever you did your master's project with end up doing a PhD with. It just so happened to be for both of you it was this kind of nice coincidence where you did this master's project that you really enjoyed, and then, you know, your supervisor had some opportunity available. So probably just to kind of give a bit of broader context for certain viewers who may be unfamiliar with how the kind of process works. And I should probably add at this point that there are many, many different ways that people get into PhDs. And I'm just outlining another variation, at least my experience. I didn't actually do a master's degree. I did my undergraduate degree. And normally what happens when you start to look for a PhD is you'll sort of see call outs from various institutions. They might have a list of people who are willing to offer certain projects. Alternatively, you can also just look around online yourself, looking at various departments for what their staff members are and what they kind of research. But the kind of key thing is you're looking for someone, well, you should have an idea of what kind of research you'd like to do, and then trying to find someone who fits that kind of area of expertise. So in my case, the university that I did my PhD at, which was Royal Holloway, they were advertising for various different potential PhD projects. I was really, really interested in prejudice at the time, still am. And so there was somebody in the department that had their area, which was based in prejudice, and was offering that sort of project. So I approached them, I emailed them, spoke to them about my interest in pursuing this, and we had some informal discussions about what it could be. And then we worked up on doing a proposal together. And obviously that's where we all then come to the same kind of juncture, where obviously you work on this proposal. Obviously you guys did it in a slightly different way, having got to know your master's, well, your PhD supervisor with your master's supervisor, but typically that's one way it will work. And I think just to kind of elaborate a little bit further, obviously you both have mentioned about developing a bond and getting along with your supervisor. And I think it's probably worth just talking a little bit more about that, because obviously it's important that they can have expertise that they can give you and supervise the project and what the overall aim of the research is and the proposal for the project is. But also it is a long commitment, 3 to 4 years, and you will work closely with your supervisor. So maybe you can talk a little bit about you know, this kind of non-expertise side of things, just a more kind of, how did you determine, obviously for both of you clearly knew your supervisor for a long period of time, but how much did that play a factor in your kind of thought processes when kind of going to apply for a PhD?
So I have a team of 3 supervisors, and I'd already worked with my primary supervisor, but I hadn't worked with my secondary supervisor at all. But other than their research expertise and being like leaders in the field that I am interested in, they're both also clinical psychologists, so do practice alongside their research and teaching. And being someone that wants to be both a researcher and a therapist, this was really important to me to get experience following in the footsteps of people that have taken the exact career path I'm interested in. So that was pretty important for me. But also knowing that they're just very, very genuine, caring people. They really care about the success of the students that they take under their wing, providing good pastoral support, as well as the research support and guidance that they give. And I think that for me was like the real main elements, but also being able to have a conversation, like a frank and open conversation about where I want to go with my career path, where I want my research to go. And that, yeah, that really stood out to me, that they are doing exactly what I want to be doing in the future.
And Gaia, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also very important. I also have 4 supervisors, which are actually 2 supervisors and 2 collaborators. And the primary supervisor I knew from before, but the other 3 I didn't. But I got to know them during these months. And I think as Elise supervisors, they're all great. Apart from being great researchers, they're also great people. And I think it's also very important to be able to have a nice chat, not just about research, but just a general motivational chat, so that you can actually bond with your supervisors and then have a better communication when it comes to your actual PhD.
Yeah, and I think the word that I was thinking of is you just need to feel kind of comfortable being able to communicate with that person. You know, it's not necessarily in the sense that, you know, you need to have chats about everyday life, but just feel comfortable that you can have a dialogue with your supervisor so you can talk about the research in a way, and also your work in a way that you feel is beneficial to improving and enhancing you. And also, Elise, you mentioned another thing which we haven't really acknowledged as well, which is not necessarily just their expertise, and also feeling like you can get along with them and talk to them and have a dialogue with them, but also the kind of skills and the educational experience, the kind of pathway that you might want to pursue. You obviously talked about wanting to be a therapist and a practitioner, as well as obviously a researcher. So the fact that your supervisor or supervisors, both of you seem to have many, which was unlike my experience. Obviously that seems to also be something you might want to consider is, you know, if that's the pathway you want to go, then someone who's kind of done it before will really be able to help you on that kind of employability aspect and getting on your next steps post PhD. So I'm kind of wondering if we can just spend a little bit of time talking about what exactly a supervisor does. So let's say we've now, as a hypothetical student, we've found an area of research that we want to do. We've identified a supervisor. We've agreed to work on a proposal. I've got on the PhD scheme. I'm going to kind of start my PhD. What should I be expecting how the next 3 or so years work? And obviously it's going to be different for each kind of project, but maybe we can outline what generally it kind of works. So how often do you kind of meet your supervisor or supervisors? What exactly do you get out of them and that sort of thing? Maybe Elise, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. So obviously it works differently within and between different universities and different supervisory teams, but in my personal experience, I will generally meet with my primary and secondary supervisor once every 2 weeks for an hour, usually over Teams. We have had one in-person meeting since I started, so that was lovely. But generally once every 2 weeks for an hour, where I come to the meeting with an agenda of items that I want to talk about, to get their guidance on, get their feedback on. We work our way through the agenda in the meeting. By the end of the meeting, we set a date for the following session. With my third supervisor, we generally tend to meet less frequently because their skill set is very particular, and I have to go to them when I have like very niche questions that my primary and secondary supervisor aren't as specialised in. So I'll generally see them maybe once a month or so, but now being on campus, it's nice to just bump into them in the corridor and have a more informal chat. But generally every 2 weeks with my primary and secondary, and maybe every month or so with my tertiary supervisor, but they're always very responsive to emails too if I'm struggling or needing support, and the odd Teams chat as well.
Yeah, it's been a bit different for me. I think it depends on your project mainly. So of course I talk with my supervisors very frequently, but for example, at the moment we're in the creating the experiment stage, so we have to brainstorm more, so we meet and we email a lot. But during the creating stimuli phase, we emailed like once every 2 weeks, because it was just me working on WebMorph and Photoshop, so it wouldn't have made sense to just have meetings with nothing to say. So I think it really depends on your project, but it's really important that even though you don't have many things to discuss, that they're always there, at least by email, to reply any doubts and cries that you want to give.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that I think both of you are mentioning. You both mentioned about being accessible via email. It's going to be a little bit different for every student. Sometimes you need a bit more assistance at certain points. So, you know, some of the contact that you will have will be initiated by you saying, look, I need some assistance with this. I'm unsure about this. Can we talk about that? And Elise, you mentioned about coming to meetings with an agenda as a sort of similar example. So that's sort of one thing, certainly, that they do, is that they try and help you and steer you along the process. It's not like it's just, okay, you're doing a PhD. In my case, it was about prejudice, and off you go. We'll see you again in 3 years, and let's see if you've managed to survive. No, obviously what they're doing is helping you carve out research questions, hypotheses, if you're doing, say, experimental work or empirical work, basically bequeathing you with knowledge and expertise, directing you in the right direction of how can you learn new statistics skills, for example. You know, maybe directing you to papers, or helping you try and improve the writing that you're doing if you're sort of doing your thesis and that kind of stuff. So really they give you that kind of support. And as you both mentioned, it's going to come down a little bit to how much support you feel like you need. And in part, that's going to probably vary across the degree as well, because I think you both said you're in your first year, is that correct?
Yeah.
And obviously in your first year, I remember looking back now and it feels like a long time, although it isn't, I suppose, but it feels certainly that way. I feel like I'm aging rapidly. That in my first year of my PhD, very much needing that kind of support, guidance, but actually towards the end of my PhD, it was very different. I felt like in some respects, the tables had kind of turned slightly. There's this kind of tipping point in a PhD where suddenly you accumulate more knowledge and know a few more things than your supervisor, and suddenly the balance just goes, haha, here we go. Now I'm going to start imparting some knowledge on you as well. And it becomes a bit more of a to and fro process where I think you can both learn things and improve each other.
Another thing that I was thinking about now is, apart from the actual support on your actual research, I think it's very important to find a supervisor who directs you to, I don't know, different conferences or seminars you can attend, or as you were saying, like for me, he directed me towards MATLAB and R. So all the skills and the connections you need to have, I think it's very important to have a supervisor that directs you towards that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that you don't have to do it alone, because I wouldn't know how to do it by myself.
Yeah, of course. And it's always a scary thing when you're like, I need to do this, but I don't know how. But that's where a supervisor comes in. They can direct you, whether it's, as you mentioned, conferences, workshops, seminars that you can go and learn some certain skills and that kind of stuff. It's, that's a key element of what a supervisor will do. So I'm just wondering, because we're running out of time, what are your kind of final thoughts about a supervisor? Let's say we've got a student who is considering applying for a PhD, or maybe is just about to begin their PhD. What is your kind of one key message you would send to them about a supervisor in a PhD?
Make sure not to find the supervisor who's the most famous, but a supervisor who is most relatable to you. So who is most perfect for your personality and your research.
And Elise, what about yourself?
I think someone that you have a really good rapport with, because I think when you have your supervisory meetings and it's just the conversations coming naturally, you're enjoying your time together, you're enjoying coming up with the ideas, that to me is so important. So rapport, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely would emphasize that final point. And I think it's a good point to sort of end on. It's not necessarily just about the expertise or their fame, but certainly also the human element, the rapport, the ability to feel like you can work with the other person. Thank you both for joining me on this topic. It was great to hear your experiences, and I hope the rest of your PhDs go very, very well, and maybe we can have you back on again in the future.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!